This is American Ground. I'm Stephen Parr here with Louis R. Avalone.
So there's a lot of folks who say that our understanding of Islam is skewed.
Okay.
And that it's just the radical extremists whose views, whose practice of that religion that is incompatible with our American values.
You do hear some say that. I've heard Bill Maher on HBO say that it's a wider problem with much more of Islam. That's not an extreme, just an extreme side of Islam. That it's more. And I do understand, like with Islam, like with Christianity, there are various different interpretations of the religion. But there are articles today about mosques in New Jersey that are very afraid of a backlash against their mosque because the guy that went and mowed down the bicyclist was going to that mosque.
Well, would you maybe like to phone a friend?
I absolutely, especially on a conversation like this, I absolutely want to phone a friend.
Yeah, because I've got a lot of questions.
Okay, so let's see if we can get, how about Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, see if we can get him on the phone.
So he's going to kind of clear some things up about Islam. Because the terrorist in New York, what did he shout?
Alluha Akbar? Yeah. On the phone right now, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser, are you there?
Yes. Great to be with you.
Excellent. You're the founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Jasser served 11 years in the United States Navy, and he's the former head of the Arizona Medical Association. Of course, you've seen him often on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. I've seen you all over the place. And, of course, you've also actually testified before Congress a couple of times on some of these issues. And so we're honored to have you here on the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. Appreciate it.
I think one of the first questions, and I've looking through your website, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, one of the questions I have is Islam compatible with the idea of America itself?
Well, I think, what you won't get from me is apologetics. I think the problem is that most Muslims are sort of, unfortunately living in a fairyland, if you will, fairy tale land that we have not, we may in our own Islam not have any conflict with America, but we're denying the fact that the Islamic establishment, be it the imams, the clerics, and especially all the Islamic governments, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, governments that run movements of hundreds of millions of people, that Islam is completely incompatible. It's theocracy. It's a Sharia state. It gives women half the vote of a man. It treats minorities in un-American ways that violates their human rights, and all done in the name of Islam. So to think that these radicals, like the guy in Manhattan Saipov, who decided to become an agent of ISIS and declared war on the United States, these guys don't spontaneously combust out of thin air. There is a continuum that begins. Just like violent anti-Semitism begins with nonviolent anti-Semitism, violent Islamism begins with nonviolent Islamism, and a lot of the mosques, a lot of the leaders in this country that claim to be representing us are part of the global Islamist insurgency. Now, having said that, Christianity just now celebrated this week on October 31st its 500-year anniversary of its Reformation. And it took 1,789 years until you had a legal system in the Christian world that separated and rendered unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God's what is God's. So I would tell you that Muslims need to sort of be given some of that room in that we look at it in a historically valid way to realize that Islam, which is only 1,438 years old, is still due to go through that Reformation and through also influence from individuals that I hope can mirror John Locke, James Madison, Jefferson, that can begin to separate mosque and state.
And that's an interesting phrase. I've seen it again on your website a couple times, separating mosque and state. And there was something else I saw on the website, and I haven't read the Quran. I don't know it, but I saw this quote on your website from the Quran, and I really thought it was very interesting. And I was hoping maybe you go a little deeper into this for me. But it says, "God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves." There are a lot of Muslims throughout the world that are living lives I wouldn't wish on my enemies.
And we put that there because one of the things I get labeled by the Islamists as being anti-Islam, as being a self-hating Muslim, all the things that the Islamists who see themselves losing power after the revolutions in the Middle East, who see themselves losing power because they're making money off of our religion and turning our faith into a political movement. And ultimately, reform, if it's going to happen, has to come from within. We realize that this is a Muslim problem that needs a Muslim solution, but we also have to realize that if you sort of say that Islam can't be reformed, you're actually then surrendering the most potent weapon for American freedom, which are Muslims that reject the theocrats, Muslims that love their faith and feel that this is our condition, our disease, our cancer that we have to treat. We want to take our community down a 12-step pathway of reform, and the first step is getting past denial. We realize we have a major denial in our community that doesn't want to deal with it, that lives in the sanctuary of freedom here in America and pretends everything is fine because, oh, by the way, there are no Muslims running government in America. That's why there's no problems here, because the theocrats aren't running the place. So if you look in the Middle East, they don't have a problem calling it Islamist. 10 million Egyptians went to the street to reject the Brotherhood because they wanted to own their own condition. And part of the feedback I get from Muslims is that they tell me, well, you're right, but don't do it publicly. It airs our dirty laundry. You cause a PR problem. I tell them, listen, Americans are smarter than you give them credit for. You would actually melt away the bigotry that exists against Islam, and against Muslims, rather, if they actually saw you owning up and being contrite and realizing that we have a problem. But instead, you all claim hatred and bigotry, and you don't deal with it. You radicalize our community instead of actually dealing with the problems. And that's why our organization is very, guts up and says, this is our problem. We are going to not only say that terrorism and extremism is the problem, but actually go deeper and say that theocratic Islam is the problem, and we need to go back and reinterpret, not rewrite, reinterpret the passages in the Quran. Because if you look, the Bible was the same Bible that went through the Reformation as it was in the 3rd and 4th century that said that you had to have a theocracy. They just reinterpreted the same passages in a more modern way.
We are talking with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, listening to American Ground Radio.
Hi, Dr. Jasser. This is Louis Avallone. Thank you for joining us tonight. So many of our listeners, their exposure to Islam is usually through the headlines or a news report of a terrorist act, and normally it's with the terrorist committing the crime and shouting Alluha Akbar. Can you maybe clarify for our listeners what is the significance of that, and do they feel like that they are pleasing God in killing innocent people?
Well, the militants, the extremists, believe that jihad is an act of worship. They believe it's one of the pillars of the faith, is to participate in a militant form of it. And, again, before Christian Reformation, there were militaries that chanted songs about onward Christian soldiers. And, this is the neat reason we need to separate mosque and state, is that Islam still hasn't gone through any of that historical reformation that it needs to go through. And ultimately, when they say Alluha Akbar, that's a phrase Muslims say a lot. We say it in our prayer. I pray 5 times a day. It means God is great. It's a way of respect. It's a way of fealty to the God of Abraham. And it's an exclamation of faith. So, I have friends, their first name is Jihad. Now, did their parents want to call them holy war? No. The term itself, jihad, means a personal struggle to be good and to be close to God. And but it's in the Quran. All of us name our kids typically a name out of the Quran. So I've said, and we've said this many times as one of our mantras, is that we want to declare jihad against jihad. And we have a Muslim reform movement that has a 2-page declaration that really calls for the 12 different points that we feel need to be reformed. And one of those includes the end of violent jihad, the end of the Islamic State, the end of any blasphemy or apostasy laws. So when your listeners and when Americans hear these things that are religious statements, remember, the Saudi government, which is supposedly the central seat of Islamic learning that has radicalized the world's Muslim community to the tune of over $100 billion of investment in radical literature. They have beheaded more people in the Saudi judiciary than ISIS has in Syria in the last 6 months.
Oh, wow.
That's sort of the way they do business, but they don't take videos of it all the time. Now, they do have a video daily of whippings that they do outside the largest mosque in Jeddah. So these folks, I'll remind people that the Saudis are our allies. We just handed them a $150 billion arms deal 2 months ago. And yes, they might be our allies in the short term against Al-Qaeda, against ISIS, but in the long term, we have to reboot who we consider to be our ally, because in the long term, they are not with us to end jihad. Muslims like myself are tortured and put in prison in Saudi Arabia. So, for the Saudi government to say, oh, these are not Islamic, they're radicals, most of the people they put in prison, actually, they leave the radicals out in the streets of Saudi Arabia while they put in prison the moderates, because the moderates actually threaten the stability of their regime a lot more, because the militants give them a cause to have a military dictatorship, which is what we saw in Syria, why the United States had to fly operations to get rid of ISIS. Assad never wanted to get rid of ISIS, neither did the Russians, because, again, it's a foil that provides them reason for military dictatorship.
Dr. Jasser, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we have to head to a commercial break, and I have thoroughly enjoyed having you on the show, and I appreciate your time and your insight. You can find out more at the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and if you'd like to support his work there, you can do it at that location.
We wish you much success.
Thank you.